Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the launch of our new report on unlocking reductions in the construction costs of nuclear, a practical guide for stakeholders. People from around the world have registered to take part in this event. To ensure a stable connection and considering the large number attending, your video and audio functions have been disabled. You can still participate in the discussion and express your views by sending your comments and asking questions via the Q&A function, which you see on the screen now. If you experience any technical difficulties, please try the chat function or email us at press@oecd-nea.org. That's the address that you received the confirmation of your participation today. You can also join the webinar via telephone. The international numbers are available in the same email message. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the NEA website in the near future. It's now my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Magwood.
Thank you and hello. My welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this important discussion. I'm Bill Magwood. I'm Director General of the Nuclear Energy Agency, and I welcome you to our latest webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about a very important new report that's being issued by the NEA. We call red costs, but it has the much longer title of unlocking reductions in the construction of cost of nuclear, practical guide to stakeholders. The purpose of this report is to recognize that nuclear energy can play a very important role, both in the near term as economies seek to recover from the COVID crisis, but also most importantly in the longer term to deal with environmental targets that many countries have set for themselves, and as well as energy security. But one of the big barriers to success has been the cost of building large new nuclear power plants. Many countries have experienced significant cost overruns as they were building new plants. And in some cases, projects have failed because of largely cost, but other factors as well. We believe that these large costs, these overruns, these problems are not inherently inherently required for nuclear projects, but they are a characteristic of the environment in which they operate. This report highlights this and discusses this in great detail. The Red Cost study completes a series of publications that we have issued. They're looking at the economics of nuclear power following our full cost report and our systems cost report that were issued over the last couple of years. And we have made a deep study on these issues of the cost of nuclear energy and the larger environment of the electricity system. And we believe this publication will help countries around the world as they seek to find ways of pursuing new nuclear projects while controlling costs. We believe there's tremendous opportunities for countries to reduce the costs and to have more successful projects. And we hope that this study helps send them on the right direction. Today, we're going to start with a presentation from Mike Middleton, who is the chair of the NEA Ad Hoc Expert Group on Reducing the Cost of Nuclear Power Generation, again, red cost. Mike is currently the Nuclear Practice Manager at the Energy System Catapult, and he joins in the transfer of Energy Technologies Institute, and he joined the Energy Technologies Transfer Institute in September 2017. He has diverse experience in defense, waste, decommissioning, nuclear site management, and new nuclear power plants. So Mike, I invite you to take the floor and explain the details of the study to our audience.
Bill, thank you for that introduction. I have 25 minutes to provide some insights from the report. So moving on. The background to this study is that nuclear is not on track against the IAEA Sustainable Development Scenario. And this is about nuclear playing its potential role in combating the causes of climate change. The experience that we've seen from recent first-of-a-kind projects in OECD and non-OECD countries is that there have been some cost overruns and some difficulties in delivering those projects, with the consequence of that presents the appearance that such projects can be both risky to deliver and also expensive. But the key message is such projects don't need to be risky and they don't need to be expensive. This issue needs to be tackled if nuclear is to step up and ramp up in delivery and help to deliver the 2050 decarbonisation goals. And in drawing on this report, our primary focus is on the short term, the next decade. And in that period, it's largely large reactors that have the potential to add new capacity to the energy systems. So our principal focus is large generation 3 light water reactors, but we do also touch on small modular reactors and advanced nuclear. So the structure of my presentation reflects the structure of the report. So I'll give a brief overview of the costs of nuclear power and reveal, so where does the money actually go in these big projects? The next stage is to look at some evidence around the drivers of nuclear construction costs and the both lessons from historical and more recent projects. I'll then step on to look at both short-term and also longer-term opportunities to reduce nuclear construction costs. And my presentation around the insights will finish with some points about the policy frameworks which are so important in reducing nuclear cost and risk and delivering nuclear as a competitive energy source as part of the goal of decarbonisation. So to begin with understanding about the breakdown of nuclear production costs, the chart on the left represents a typical investment cost as part of the levelised cost of electricity. And what the chart on the left shows is around 3/4 of the cost is to do with the capital investment. The operating costs, the O&M, and the fuel costs are relatively small within the overall cost of the levelised cost of electricity. And within that initial investment cost, it's the financing that plays a very significant element, both in the interest during construction and also the return on the capital during the operating phase of the plant. So that's a typical illustration. And the chart on the right shows recent experience and some analysis over a number of years. And it's divided between the direct cost in delivering the project and the indirect cost. And what we can see is that in recent projects, it's the growth of indirect cost, which has contributed to the increasing capital cost of these projects. So there's a hint here, which is the goal, is to drive down on those indirect costs, which could be non-recurring costs in deploying a program of a generation of new reactors. So this slide talks about the change in trend in projected costs. We can see in the chart on the right that initial estimates for early projects with a relatively low design maturity and the political context in which they were delivered realised outturn costs that were significantly greater than the original estimates. But the part of the chart on the right shows that going forward with the learning post first-of-a-kind projects, reflecting increased design maturity and lessons learnt, the expectation is those costs will fall. Now, this gap is really important because this initial set of early first-of-a-kind projects could create this perception that nuclear projects are both risky and expensive, with the potential to impact public acceptance. So it's really important for the industry to move into this next phase. So this is a core chart within the study, and it's intended to illustrate a number of factors. So beginning on the left-hand side of the chart, this illustrates the costs profile associated with a first-of-a-kind reactor. And there are a number of elements in the waterfall cascade that could rapidly lead to a reduction in cost for a post-FOAK reactor, shown in the middle. But in the longer term, there is opportunity through further measures to further reduce cost towards nth of a kind. And of the experts that participated in the panel, there were representatives from countries at different parts on this cascade chart. The chart also shows in the error bars how our reflection is featured for small modular reactors and advanced reactors. Now, these designs are much less mature, not yet ready for commercial deployment, but they would be expected to follow the same cascade in the transition from first of a kind through post-FOAK to nth of a kind. And those key steps post-FOAK are the developing design maturity offers that potential for reduction, and improvements with experience in project management. We've seen that regulatory stability and predictability is a key feature, and we've seen a number of projects where multi-units on the same site is also a key feature in reducing costs. But in the longer term, design optimization of optimizing the plants for constructability, pulling on available process innovations and technology innovations, and also revisiting those regulatory interactions can also continue to drive costs down. And a future potential for some element of harmonization amongst licensing codes and standards can also play a role in the long-term reduction of costs. So moving on to the next part of the presentation, I'd like to talk for a moment about some of the lessons from historical and more recent projects. So there are a number of examples within the report, so I've chosen to illustrate it through this particular chart, which focuses on the EPR. So there are a few features in this chart. Firstly, on the left-hand side of the graph is the experience at Flamanville, reflecting the outturn costs and the various features that have grown during project delivery compared with the initial budget. We compare that with the other plant or project shown on this chart, which is the twin EPRs at Taishan. This chart indicates that that plant was delivered to budget. And this reflects a mature industry in a mature delivery program with expertise in the delivery of these projects, and goes on to illustrate that step from FOAK to post-FOAK to NOAK. And some of the factors indicating the difference between these two projects are shown on the chart on the right. The site clearly makes a difference, the design maturity and the ability to learn lessons. The maturity of the supply chain and its capability is also a factor. The way that project management was delivered for these projects. But the last one is really important in terms of political leadership and commitment. That long-term commitment, which is so important to mobilizing the supply chain to invest in long-term reduction and the generation of capabilities. So historical and recent projects have demonstrated learning effects with serial construction. So this is repeated deployment of projects. And these features are a combination of both the program effect, where you have repeated deployment of similar projects, allowing you to bear down on those indirect costs or non-recurring costs. And also the productivity effect, which is the learning by doing, which is grown through the experience in the supply chain of repeated execution of similar tasks and the learning of how to do them with the right quality, but quicker and more effectively. It's a really important point to note that simply building lots of reactors is not the key to long-term cost reduction, because the literature is also associated with papers showing countries where in a part of a long-term build, costs either stayed the same or went up. But there are some clear examples in France in the 1980s, in Japan in the 90s, followed by Korea and now Russia and China, where if done in the right way, delivered with the right enablers, unlocks real long-term cost reduction. We've also seen that multi-unit construction at the same site can also really bear down on those non-recurrent costs of infrastructure development per reactor. And this is partly by sharing site infrastructure between a greater number of units, but also enabling the supply chain through its productivity improvements to get better and better from unit to unit. And the previous NA report in 2000 provided some estimates of the impact of that effect. But more recently, in the Baraka unit, we've seen some amazing demonstration of productivity improvements and cost reductions stepping from the first unit through to the fourth unit. Nuclear safety regulation can also enable cost reductions to deliver cost-effective nuclear projects. A core condition for successfully delivering those projects is regulatory stability and regulatory predictability. And we can see examples in this slide where those conditions were not true, of how that impact on the delivery of these projects and the impact on the outturn cost of those projects. So in the report, we consider innovative approaches to revisiting those regulatory interactions. And that's a regulatory awareness that how they regulate and the decisions they make can have an impact on cost and performance and outturn of the project. There are occasions when there are good outcomes for both regulators and developers in cooperating to understand how different measures in the optimization of the project can reduce cost. And I have a case study around that in the next slide. And the industry is familiar with clear and transparent communication as being one of those really important elements of a regulatory interaction. So if there's an alignment of objectives and outcomes of both regulators and licensees, then this can also unlock cost reduction potential. So one of the examples in the report speaks to the optimization phase in the UK Horizon project, which is Hitachi GE's plans at the time to deliver advanced boiling water reactors in North Wales, in the UK. It's clear here that the phrase is cooperation, because this has to be led by the developer, but the engagement with a regulator, able to in a timely way, review proposals and consider their implications, was the key to unlocking this optimization phase. And at the heart of it was taking the regulatory approved design, the GDA, and considering how that could be optimized for a particular location at a particular site for 2 units. So obviously, there is some site infrastructure that we could share, but the review was much deeper than that, looking over 100 opportunities to take out cost and not impact on safety. And some of the key attributes here were the regulators' engagement at executive level, the growing capability in both the regulators and the developer and licensee for mature decisions, and also from being able to challenge some of the initial design assumptions that have been locked into the design that had regulatory approval. But there was also a learning, again, this multi-unit effect, that committing to 4 units at the outside has the potential to liberate much deeper cost reductions. So moving on to short and then longer term opportunities to reduce nuclear construction costs. One of the key mindset changes is the transition from nuclear power plant delivery as bespoke, artisan crafted projects through to nuclear energy being perceived as being delivered through products. And what this chart shows that the key is optimizing that product, making it better and better, and doing that through enabling processes which support the optimization of that product, but also construction delivery processes which can also optimize that product. And at the heart of this is moving away from bespoke one-off projects through to a stream of products that are similar. And this is part of the key of bearing down on those indirect costs. Now, this philosophy applies whether it's a large reactor or a small modular reactor. So this philosophy is consistent, but small modular reactors might pursue some of the enabling processes and some of the construction processes in a different way. But this shift from one-off bespoke project into products and a stream of similar products is key. So a moment to talk about small modular reactors. The chart on the left reflects two types of plant. The large reactor, which aims to deliver significant economies of scale by scaling up the size of the plant. And those economies of scale would not be available to the small modular reactors. And so the pursuit of cost reduction through light water small modular reactors is really through the economy of multiples, and the modularization and factory build, simplification, standardization, and harmonization as far as it can be taken. So there are two different approaches, but they sit in that same philosophy of nuclear energy being a product rather than a sequence of unconnected projects. Now, the scope of the Red Cost project was largely around large reactors because they have scope for significant capacity addition by 2030. But many of the features that we talk about in the detail are equally relevant for small modular reactors. I'd like to talk for a moment then about the importance of policy frameworks in delivering competitive nuclear energy. It's clear that the government has a role, and many roles, but one of these is the need for long-term planning. Nuclear new build requires commitment for a long-term plan and specific regulation that's put in place for the long term. And the evidence through the Red Cost project developed, there's a clear rationale for further government intervention on financing. And the logic behind this there are externalities around the benefits of nuclear energy in terms of clean air, fuel diversity, the diverse energy mix, and employment opportunities. There's also issues around the structure of electricity markets, the ability to penetrate with effective long-term products that the investors can support. And there's also a macroeconomic context around weakening money policy and the need for potential opportunity for nuclear to drive a greener economy as part of the post-COVID-19 recovery. So just as an example of the importance of long-term commitment and political leadership, the chart illustrates the new build construction program in China. Nuclear power here was selected as a strategic choice to support the country's development. And the role in political leadership was to align and mobilize the many stakeholders with their different roles in order to realize such a program. And within the Chinese program, there was a stepwise approach, making full use of technology transfers backed up by gradual localization. And over 30 years, there's been a nuclear new build momentum to develop a domestic nuclear supply chain. And that's backed up by the growing capability in people and organizations that can be found within China supporting their nuclear program. We've seen at the outset of my presentation that affordable financing is a key element driving the economic performance of nuclear. And what this chart serves to show is that the cost of capital has a major impact on the levelized cost of energy. So there's much that can be done to reduce the overnight capital cost of nuclear, but in making it an affordable choice within a low carbon energy mix, then making affordable finance available to nuclear is also really important. And we think there's a strong rationale for governments to support in a number of ways by reducing the cost of capital. What this chart shows from within the report is an indication of some of the risks involved in the delivery of nuclear power plant projects, and also the different stakeholders involved in terms of who might be the principal owner, but also who contributes to this risk. And this shows correctly that there are risks that belong to the vendor and risks that belong to the developer, but there are also risks that are largely managed and owned by governments. And those involved in projects know that the best way to manage, mitigate risks is by allocating them to the organisations best placed to manage them. So affordable financing also comes with the approach to the correct and appropriate allocation of risk. In terms of supporting financing, there are different number of mechanisms available, and these very much depend on particular country conditions and will vary from country to country. And there are many, many options, from direct financial support, shown in this table on the left, through to some of the more indirect approaches shown in the middle and on the right of the chart. So there are a number of prudential approaches, and it isn't a one-size-fits-all. This is a country-by-country approach. But the view of the panel was the expectation that such support ought to be transitional. With government support to get into a drumbeat of regular project delivery, the bearing down on costs also has the consequence of bearing down on risks. And bearing down on risks will deliver more repeatable projects. As projects become more repeatable and lower cost, they are perceived as less risky, which should drive down the cost of financing. So there's this virtuous circle of cost reduction and risk reduction enabling new projects. So moving to my conclusions, the first of 3 slides, the nuclear sector is transitioning from first-of-a-kind projects and could deliver quite quickly much more competitive large-scale Generation 3 reactors. We need to capitalise on the lessons learned from recent projects and provide governments with the opportunity to participate in realising cost reductions in the next sequence of reactors through timely new build decisions. We know that regulatory stability and predictability is such an important driver in delivering successful projects. So this should be prioritised accordingly. And for countries that are considering multiple new build projects, there may be merits in committing to a standardised nuclear programme with the transfer of technology and the growth of local content. But this very much is a country-by-country approach and depends on the ambitions for nuclear energy in each of these countries. Moving to the second slide. It's important to give a very clear signal to supply chains and industrial entities about long-term policies and long-term commitments. With the confidence that these policies are long-term commitments, the private sector can be expected to invest more in growing capability and investing in both equipment and knowledge that enable them a full part in delivering cost reduction in these future projects. And really, it's important to foster innovation, talent development, and collaboration at all levels. And one of the features that I discovered in particular was the efforts in China as part of their program to really invest in the talent, the engineers, the project managers, the team that were delivering in those projects. So my last slide is the need for government to provide a framework which supports competitive new nuclear construction. And this is about robust and predictable market and financing frameworks, which is essential in Western OECD countries to deliver cost competitive new nuclear. Now, the next point is this is not for government alone, but government does have a role in opening and engaging those stakeholder efforts to get a fuller understanding of the role that nuclear energy can deliver in a modern society and a low carbon energy system, so that there is a fuller understanding of the benefits that this technology can bring. The final point on this slide is it's so important to tailor government involvement to the particular needs of a particular country. Within the Red Cross group, we've had representatives from countries that are starting new nuclear or restarting new nuclear, or for countries that have had an uninterrupted nuclear delivery program, so that they're at a different part of the nuclear cost reduction curve. So it's very clear that the nature of government involvement will vary from country to country, but the need for that government involvement is very, very clear. So just before I hand back to Bill, I would just like to thank my colleagues on the Red Cross group, and in particular Antonio and Michelle, who put so much effort and expertise into the report. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's an excellent overview of the report. We've already started getting some questions. We're a little bit behind schedule, but I will ask you one question to react to. And that is, you highlighted the success of the Chinese approach to building these plants. Is there anything special about the Chinese situation that is different from what you would see in Western countries, or anything that would not be translatable to Europe or North America that you observed in the Chinese project?
Well, clearly the political structure and context is different in China compared to Western democracies. But that would be avoiding the issue of strong, consistent and clear government commitment to delivering a Chinese program. So the thing that comes over on most is the commitment. And it's possible to look for other reasons why it might be different, but that commitment is so important.
Thank you very much. Now, we have a very illustrious panel to discuss this today, and I think they will all join us on video now. I'll introduce them as they come up, but then we'll give each of them a chance to say a few words and then answer a few questions. And we're going to begin with a very close friend of the Nuclear Energy Agency, Mr. Paul Kovacs, who is State Secretary responsible for maintaining the capacity to PAX nuclear power plant in Hungary. He is both an engineer and an economist, and he has great experience, and we have found him to be a very good policy thinker as well. So, Mr. Kovacs, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, DG. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank you for the opportunity to be here with you and discuss about the Red Cross report. And first, also, let me congratulate the colleagues at the NEA for this excellent study. We have found it very useful, as all of the NEA studies. So we have a turnkey contract for the extension of the nuclear power plant of PAX that provides us a certain comfort in managing the cost for the time period of the project. We are sharing the view of the NEA and fully agree with the opening statement of the study explaining why without more nuclear new build projects, the world cannot meet the sustainable development climate action goals, as we do need nuclear power to reduce global carbon emissions. There is no new tested, proven and industrial scale application for the electricity storage on the horizon as we estimated. This is why at this moment the renewable energy sector won't be able to cope along with the challenge of the security of electricity supply and decarbonization together globally without nuclear power generation. Nuclear has played and will continue to play an important role in the Hungarian electricity system, at least till the end of this century. We believe that government commitment is essential for the nuclear project. So, regarding the government commitment, in our case, we have a separate minister responsible for the PAX-2 nuclear nuclear new build project in my home country. and the minister is member of the government. So the project is treated, managed at the highest level. The minister coordinates the international and intergovernmental agreements, the intergovernmental agreement between Hungary and Russia, the financial intergovernmental agreement of the project, and he is also responsible for the coordination between the policy and expert layers, the realization of the project, and the coordination between all stakeholders. There is no special market regulation mechanism for the PAX-2. The future companies to sell the electricity on the wide European electricity market through the electricity exchange and on transparent auctions. However, the government involvement is essential to finance the project. We have access to a Russian credit up to 10 billion euros to finance the new nuclear build through a Hungarian-Russian financial intergovernmental agreement, which is clearly a state-level decision. Up to now, all credits taken from that loan are paid back to Hungary, to Russia, so no additional costs are induced yet by paying the interest rates. In the pre-construction phase of the project, we have met several challenges which can be characterized as organizational and also policy framework risk in the Red Coast report. Therefore, government support was given from the organizational support point of view as in the framework of a creation of a state-owned company, the so-called PAX-2 project company, for the implementation of the project. Currently, this company has about 400 employees. And regarding the policy framework, which is also a kind of a government support, the regulatory framework was amended to bring it in line with the creation of the new units, instead of concentrating only on nuclear operation that we experienced in the past 40 years. So, you know, our first nuclear reactor was constructed in the 70s. We had a learning by doing experience by the PAX nuclear power plant. Hungary has a great amount of experience in operating the nuclear power plant. However, we haven't been constructing nuclear units for more than 40 years now. So we have lost the majority of our construction, installation, and industrial capabilities. In the 90s, we have developed the regulatory framework. Originally in the 70s, early 80s, we had no nuclear regulatory body. So we had to establish a new Atomic Act, a nuclear safety code, a decommissioning fund, set up a nuclear authority, as it is one of the first steps now recommended by the IAEA to the Hungarian Atomic Energy Agency. And we have also become, in 2004, member of the European Union. That also made some challenges. Therefore, for the PAX-2 nuclear new build project, we have to refresh how to license and how to build. The adaptation of the design documentation of the PAX-2 company to Hungarian and EU requirements was really a time-consuming. Well, we want a safe nuclear power plant. Due to all these changes for the PAX-2 company, now we have all the documentation and design available before starting the construction work. So this might elongate the pre-construction period. However, we believe that the host country could benefit from the deeper understanding of the units and the technological solutions at this early stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very, very interesting. And we do have some questions for you, but I'm watching the time very closely. So what I think I'll do is I'll go through each of the speakers and then we'll save the questions till the end. So with that, let me ask Lisa Henkin-Hamo to give her comments. Lisa is Deputy Director General for Nuclear Energy and Fuels with the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment of Finland. Lisa, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, DG, and good afternoon, other colleagues, and thank you for inviting me and our Finnish story in this panel. So I will be brief and just remind you that the need of electricity and production in Finland is rather high. We are a Nordic country, and we have an energy-intensive industry in our country, and it will become even more energy-intensive in the future. So this type of topic is very important. So our production is today based on various technologies, and nuclear is one of those, about 1/3 of the production. But we are also importing about 20% of our needs. So this is something that gives space for the new projects. And we have 4 operating units. They are like 40 years old units today, but in a good shape. For Olkiluoto 1 and 2, we just granted 20 years more operational time, and we will see what happens with the Loviisa units 1 and 2 rather soon. But then we have Olkiluoto 3, which is the unit in a commissioning phase, and we are of course expecting very much the date for the fueling of this unit. And in the report of NEA, there is a good comparison of these Gen 3 units and the costs. So this is something that we are very much interested, and the report seems to be quite interesting for this purpose. Then we have one newcomer project which we call is in a design phase. This is Hanhikivi 1 in the northern part of Finland, and this is a Rosatom design unit. So we have different ages and different phases of the programs, and of course a lot of investments in Finland for the nuclear ongoing. I would like also to remind that we have this waste repository project, POSIPA project, that is ongoing, and it is fully financed by the owners, so it means the power companies. And nuclear will be, like Palkovac said, that like this century is for nuclear, and this is something we believe also in Finland, because the time span of the fleet is covering this century. In fact, for the POSIPA repository, it will go beyond. And to reach the CO2 zero targets 2035, which is our goal in Finland, it means that we really need this nuclear production. I looked the report, as I said, it seems to be very interesting, and I can see one specificity from Finland, that our model is based fully on private companies, on the financing of private companies. And these are really responsible for the initiatives and for the investments. But it means that our government and the ministry has a very important role here. And it is also comes out from the report that the acceptance, the public acceptance and the political stability, they are like the cornerstones for, I would say, all the parameters in these investments, that we really need long-term and stable policies and strategies that are open and understand, people can understand these. So the price for the using nuclear is really based on this. Of course, I looked the learnings from the first of the kind projects in the report, and there are site design maturity, supply chain capabilities. So meaning that the infrastructure and the technologies need to be there. They need to be understood. We need to have sufficient national knowledge and skills, and this is something that the government can support, certainly. Also the support for reliable and high quality supply chains, I think there is a role for the government to this supply chain issue is extremely important for the long-term investments, and this is something we have exercised in Finland in a large group of experts. So this is something I want to underline, that after this spring, it turns out that this supply chain issue becomes even more important. We should analyze what type of reflections from this COVID spring will bring in the supply chains. There are some implications already we see. Okay, so of course it's important to have the project management, and if I'm frank, I can say that a full turnkey order can't be placed in a country which has a mature and strong authority. We have proven this in Finland, and we will prove it. So it means that there needs to be a good cooperation between the power company, the supplier, but also with the other stakeholders. So it is not a play of two different bodies only. This is something we all need to be capable to participate. I think this is quite much I would like to say here. Maybe to finalize, I really would underline the common international strategies and policies towards the nuclear energy. And for us Europeans today, this seems to be a critical topic to discuss, and I hope that nuclear would be included, not excluded. So to be successful with these climate change goals and with the top level industries in Europe too in future. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Excellent. And there's lots of questions for you as well. So we'll save them until the end and incorporate them into the discussion. So I will move on to Christy Gogan, who is co-founder and executive director of Energy for Humanity, an environmental NGO focused on large-scale deep decarbonization and energy access. And for NEA aficionados, Christy is a very familiar face. And Christy, it's good to see you again.
Great to see you. Thank you. Thanks everyone so much, and congratulations on this really important intervention. It's a great report. So we've heard that one of the recommendations of the Red Cost report is the importance of committing to a standardized nuclear program to sustain the learning curve and trigger this virtuous circle of economic performance as supply chains are developed and perceived technological organizational risks fall. And in particular, the decision in building large contemporary reactors isn't about whether to begin, but actually when to stop. And that finally, the technical and organizational improvements that stems from these approaches will also then serve to accelerate the deployment of more advanced reactor technologies like SMRs. And the good news is that there's plenty of evidence to support these findings, not least recent studies from the Energy Technologies Institute, the MIT Future of Nuclear study, and most recently the UK Energy Systems Catapult, all have findings that are very consistent with the findings of this substantial, detailed, and extremely valuable piece of work. Now, the reason that this matters is because the potential for nuclear energy to become a competitive climate solution matters because all of the evidence shows that the fastest path to zero is through a combination of nuclear and renewables. And the evidence also tells us that this combination of renewables and nuclear energy also delivers the most affordable and the most feasible path to zero. So ultimately, what this is actually really about is de-risking our path to net zero through enabling a really diverse set of pathways. Because achieving net zero across our whole economy by 2050, 30 years from now, is going to be a Herculean effort by anybody's standards. So we really have to think about this and consider this effort in the context of the profound risk of failing to decarbonize in time, and in terms of the real challenges that we will be facing in achieving net zero. So this is why we need to apply the same determination and the same levels of commitment to cost reduction for nuclear energy as we've successfully demonstrated for other technologies like offshore wind. Now, the offshore wind program has demonstrated how sustained access to finance and continuous build in exchange for a determined commitment to cost reduction by the industry and increased deployment is a really successful formula that enables improved performance and competitiveness. Now, as we've seen in this report, we have a really credible path available here to realize the same kinds of competitiveness and increased rates of deployment for nuclear energy as well. So in other words, what we've seen here is that nuclear energy doesn't need to be expensive if we take the right approach. So our study for the Energy Technologies Institute, the Nuclear Cost Drivers study that was led by our consulting firm Lucid Catalyst, and has been cited as the basis for achievable cost reduction in the UK's nuclear sector deal, really strongly supports the findings of this study, of this excellent study by our colleagues at NEA today. And it really sort of supports the idea that an intentional and determined commitment to proven best practices around things like design standardization, timely and effective programmatic sequencing, including multiple units on a single site, because don't forget, a program doesn't necessarily mean, you know, tens of gigawatts. A programmatic benefits can be achieved even on a single site with you know 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 units on a single site, can deliver dramatic fleet effect benefits and deliver really highly competitive nuclear new build. So the commitment to timely and effective programmatic sequencing of projects is key. And then secondly, really intentional learning, because the fleet effect doesn't happen by itself. Intentional learning and the intentional determined application of best practices can really benefit those investments that need to be made in the first of a kind projects to establish the skills and the capability within the supply chain, the labor force, the regulator, the project leadership, essentially the investment that you need to make to start a nuclear program. The key thing then is obviously to sustain it and amplify those benefits. Now, we've seen cost reduction in offshore wind has been really driven by a competitive procurement process. And as Mike's indicated, there's also potential to amend the technologies and the processes to be more amenable to this kind of repeat build, manufacturing-based model, moving from the project-based approach much more towards a product-based approach. So I'll conclude by just saying that, you know, obviously there's a lot of work to do and there's a lot of effort that needs to be made. Those nuclear plants are not going to build themselves. We need the industry to step up, take responsibility, intentionally, rigorously apply learning and best practices from those good experiences, both within our own sector, but also from other industries in existing and in previous new build programs. And, you know, I'm really pleased to see like the pathway that this report sets out, showing the evidence for how low cost construction costs are really entirely achievable if the right actions are taken. And for those of us who care about climate, along with the abundant supply of clean and reliable and affordable and available energy, all efforts should be made to create the right market incentives for industry to deliver this potential to play a really meaningful role in a timely mitigation effort with really the urgency and the scale that's required.
Excellent. Thank you, Christy. Thank you very much. And as you know, I agree with a lot of the work that you've been doing, and I think that the reports that you put out and the one in this report, I think there's a lot of commonalities in the point of view. So hopefully we reinforce the points together. So thank you for being here. I know that Xavier has a schedule issue, so I'm going to ask him to speak next, just to be sure that we get his full presentation in. Xavier Ersat is Group Senior Executive Vice President for New Nuclear Projects and Engineering with EDF. He's a graduate at École Polytechnique in Telecom Paris and joined EDF in 1991, holding various positions in the hydraulic engineering department until 2002. So we have a real live practicing engineer with us here. Xavier, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bill, and thank you for taking into account the fact that I cannot stay with you and after quarter to 5. It's a pleasure for me to join this webinar following the launch of the OECD report. And this report on cost reduction in nuclear is a key document to understand what the nuclear energy may bring in the near future if we draw the good lessons from the experience of recent nuclear new build projects. The NEA report indeed highlights how the cost of the third generation 4 project drifted. It's a pity, but this recent project may lead nuclear energy to be considered as an expensive source of energy, what we obviously do not want. And this report pragmatically shows that we have several levers to reduce the cost and gain in competitiveness. I would like to highlight on 4 of them. The focus on schedule and compliance first, the state involvement, the second one, the financing question, the third one, and the series and standardization effect, the 4th one. First, I would say that focus on schedule and on compliance are our main priority in the industry. You know, in our project, this has to be our guideline from early design to commissioning. If schedule and compliance are duly managed by quality, cost reduction follows, in fact. So if we target on schedule, target on compliance, cost reduction follows. Moreover, avoiding late rework is not only a question of cost reduction and competitiveness, but also, I think, deeply that's a question of trust, a question of credibility. The second point is state involvement, which is fundamental. I think that governments have twofold role. The first one is that as political leaders, obviously, and representative of the communities, they benefits from the infrastructure in terms of security, sovereignty, jobs, natural resources, energy transition towards a carbon neutral society. They shall actively mobilize on the projects. I think this is a key topic if we want to deliver good nuclear new build projects. To do so, they have to express a very strong willingness to have good projects and include them in the long-term planning of stable industry and stable energy policies. Secondly, even then, government cannot just let the project happen. It requires regulation. Not only market condition during the operation phase, what we think about when we speak about regulation, but given the highly capital intensive model, duration of nuclear projects, and the strong impact of permitting and licensing processes, those regulations should also incentive the actors in the construction phase as early as possible, and even in the development phase if possible. My third point is on financial cost. Financing cost can be a large share of the total costs. Alleviating that share is key. It mostly depends on financial engineering and risk allocation. The cost of capital is linked to risk perception, which derives from the trust we have in the capability of the industry to deliver the projects. So we have to target on this point, which is, in my view, very important. And my fourth and last point and topic or issue will be the series effect and the program approach based on a standardization. As you may know, among other projects in the nuclear new build division inside the EDF, we are getting prepared for building new reactors in France as a contribution to renewing the French nuclear fleet, most of which was commissioned in the 80s and 90s. The government asked EDF, the French government asked EDF to prepare a program based on 3 pairs of EPR2, 6 EPR2, a program to be ready by mid-2021, next year. Our EPR4 project has been providing us plenty of feedback. We will surely consider the insight of the NEA report on reducing costs in nuclear projects as a reference to make the best case for this program. And I will conclude saying that I think this report is an important milestone and that I strongly recommend sharing it as widely as possible with all shareholders. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And since I know you're going to be leaving soon, let me give you one question before we move on to Mr. Komarov. And that is a very good question that came out, that electricity prices in many OECD countries, and particularly in Europe, are very weak. And are the result in some cases from subsidies and different interventions by governments. Do electricity markets support any nuclear construction, no matter how well controlled the costs are today in OECD countries?
I think that this is true that the market prices are very weak, and this is the result of many phenomena. And in fact, the fact that, of course, we had a crisis quite in the last month, but also the fact that now most of the new ways of production, new generation installation that get into commissioning are regulated, in fact, and we have to wonder what is the signification of the market prices, and that we should consider them as a way to balance, in fact, the way to balance the capacity of the different actors to produce and sell electricity, and not as a basis for investment. So I think that we should consider them as a short-term signal. We should integrate the fact that this short-term signal will never give the opportunity to invest, and that we need for investing a stable basis brought by regulation. This is very important for me. We should not mix the important and the issue of short-term signal for the well-balanced electricity system and the signal brought by regulation to invest.
That's a very interesting and provocative point you're making.
This may be provocative, but I deeply think about that. This is true, in fact.
Well, I will say that it does resonate with what Mike was saying in his presentation, that governments have to be involved, have to take a role, have to take leadership. And basically you're saying deferring to the markets is not doing that, and it's not going to get these plants built.
I think that every way to produce decarbonized energy is based on long term. It means that it is capital intensive, whatever it is, renewable or nuclear. It means that it has to be built for the long term, for many decades, and we need stable signals. We need regulation. We need a strong and a stable political wish.
Fascinating. I'm going to ask the others to react to that when we get to the Q&A section, but thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you.
Hopefully you'll be around at the very end and we can get one more question. And if not, thank you for being here.
This was a pleasure.
Thank you. So finally, last but certainly not least, a very good colleague for many years, Mr. Kirill Komarov, who's first Deputy Director General for Corporate Development and International Business with Rosatom. He entered this role in 2011 and has been responsible for the oversight of the state corporation's foreign business activities, international orders, portfolio growth, and Rosatom's global standing. Mr. Komarov, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Magwood, for your kind introduction. And Mr. Middleton, thank you for your insightful presentation. I'm confident this report will become a crucial tool in helping stakeholders navigating the complex environment of nuclear project financing and reducing associated costs. It's a big pleasure for me and privilege to speak in front of you today. Our company, Rosatom, operates in more than 50 countries around the world. We have ongoing new build projects in 12 of them, with 36 power units at various implementation stages. And we have experience and exposure in running projects in both non-OECD countries and OECD countries, such as Finland, Hungary, and Turkey. And in Finland and Turkey, we are not only vendors of technology, but equity investors too. In terms of cost drivers, I would suggest noting a difference between technologically related cost drivers, basically what vendors can learn, innovate, and optimize, and market-related cost drivers, project location, and policies of a specific location. When it comes to technologically related drivers, I completely agree with the point that moving from first of a kind to serial is crucial and will make a real difference. When you build or manufacture something for the first of a, it's impossible to avoid problems. We had our fair share of fork challenges 15 years ago in our projects in Russia, in China, in India. We have learned from them. Our fork projects took over 10 years to complete on average. Now we sign contracts committing ourselves to commission units in 7 years after obtaining the license, and for some projects managed to connect them to the grid even in just about 5 years. But when it comes to market-related costs, I think that the main point, it's a problem nuclear is expensive or nuclear can't compete with renewables is mainly a problem of the rich countries of the West, not that of the rest of the world. I remember a very interesting study Kirsty and her colleagues published a few years ago. While in the United States, France, UK, and Finland, the cost of kilowatt ranged from $8,000 to $12,000. In other countries in the same time, in Russia, in China, South Korea, etc., it was between $2,000 and $4,000. The reasons behind such cost in many OECD countries is that vendors have to pay what I would call as anti-nuclear prejudice premium, which is a price you have to pay for political risk, for regulatory risk, for troubled supply chains, and for unfair market environment where your competitors in other energy sectors are heavily subsidized. If you look closer to the figures in the report, the cost of equipment, first of all, of nuclear island is not that high. And it can be even decreased when you start building in series, which in the stage we've achieved with our VVR 1200 flagship design. As in the report presented today, maturity of design is a key. That's why we, for instance, don't share the approach that innovation in cost reduction is always a good thing. If you do innovation just for the sake of it, you might end up having a cutting-edge design which no one would be ready to finance, simply because your construction risks for a completely forked model are way too high. That's why we prefer gradual evolutionary optimization of tried and tested reliable designs. There is a very telling figure in the report. Finance cost of the capital is about 60% of capex and almost half of the final cost of kilowatt hour. Current central bank interest rates are close to zero. Power generation and utilities are among the most non-cyclical sectors. So half of the current price tag of the new nuclear kilowatt hours is just the cost of risk, political decisions, our subsidized renewables, regulation changes. Personally, I do not believe in one-size-fits-all cost reduction recipes. Each country is unique, each site is unique, public attitudes and political systems vary, as does demand and the market landscape. We can dream of harmonized regulation and completely standardized nuclear plants, but the reality is utterly different. Therefore, in my opinion, the main cost reduction factor for OECD is removing the obstacles to state interventions needed to reduce risk. And it would be a fair treatment of nuclear. It creates a great deal of public value by creating jobs, boosting GDP growth and tax revenues, and ensuring energy security. If nuclear is accepted as an essential part of net zero energy infrastructure and all public-private partnership schemes are applied to reduce the cost of capital and market risk, then it saves the bulk of cost and unleashes the potential of further savings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that completes our speakers' presentations. And I'd like to thank all of them for their remarks. What I think I would like to do is to start where I said I would start, with the comment by Mr. Ursat, who may or may not still be with us, regarding the idea that prices are only a short-term signal and should not be used as a basis for making investment decisions. And I'd like to really hear from maybe perhaps the whole panel on that very briefly. And let me ask Lisa to initiate this and see what her thoughts about that are.
Sorry, Chairman, can you repeat once?
Yes, Mr. Ursat gave his opinion that market prices are only a short-term signal and should not be used as a basis for investments. And in his view, the government should basically be making these decisions on what capacity and what type of plant should be built to get the right balance in the long-term future. I was just curious about what your feelings about that were.
Okay. I start with the market price. If it fluctuates, it's not a good signal for investments, of course. If it's not like stable, and I think the best signal is still the real need of electricity, because if you base your production on renewables only, it will not be like base load available, and the price for the base load will become anyway valuable in the future. So I hope I answered this question.
No, I think you have. Thank you. Christy, what do you think?
Thanks. Yeah, I think this is a really critical point for a number of reasons. Obviously, from the performance of the whole system is what matters, and that's in terms of carbon reduction. And quite often, I think when we talk about climate action, we use the wrong metrics for success. We talk about technology deployments and LCOE when actually what really matters is carbon reduction. So we should be thinking about our system in terms of the lowest overall carbon emissions that you can achieve through a combination of technologies. And as I said earlier, the combination of nuclear and renewables has demonstrated to be really effective at driving out carbon whilst maintaining reliability and affordability and flexibility. But the other point is around value for consumers, for taxpayers, for the people who are paying for this energy. And again, it's the performance of the whole system that we should be measuring here. We've actually just completed a study which is going to be published shortly for ARPA-E in the US, where we modeled advanced reactors into future energy systems with high penetrations of renewables. And what we found was that by incorporating advanced reactor technologies combined with thermal energy storage, enabling a really good load following capability with variable renewables, we not only drove out the carbon emissions from the system and improved the overall performance in terms of reliability and flexibility, but actually also lowered the overall cost of the system compared to what had been previously modeled, which is a system with a lot of renewables and a lot of gas.
Very, very interesting. Mr. Komarov, would you like to comment on this?
Sorry, I have some problem with microphone. No, in general, I agree with what was said with my predecessors, and I think that when we are talking about such a project like nuclear power plant construction, we definitely cannot think only about existing price on the market. Nobody can predict what we will be facing in the future for next 60 years. And that's why in my speech I told that the role of government is very important, because to propose and to provide some platform and some sort of support for the project, definitely it gives a lot of opportunity to create a successful story. Because if you have some sort of support, doesn't matter what is this form, it could be like contract for difference like in the United Kingdom, or for example power purchase agreement for the long time period. Yes, you can have a very good base to return your investments, and we all know that further on it will be the most cheapest source of electricity. That's why you do not need to think about what is the existing price on the market, because definitely it can be different in different time periods. But if government is involved, I think we do not need even to think about it.
Mr. Kovac, any thoughts on this issue?
Well, I can only share with you my experiences or our experience. Hungary has a very specific situation. We cannot rely that much on a very different and wide range of energy resources. So we can only rely on the nuclear power. We have no hydro at all, and the renewable energy resources. So those are the two from which we have to build on our energy mix. We have certain days when last year, for example, when the peak consumption went up to 7,000 megawatts, while the renewable energy sources were only delivering the installed capacity somewhat more than 1,500 megawatts. They were contributing only less than 100 megawatts. So these are the situations where we have to manage the consumption by import largely. So if we wouldn't have the nuclear power plant, then we would have been in a great trouble. So this is one point of view. Another point of view that on a long term, the responsibility for the security of supply stays with the national governments, while the regulation, it's basically nowadays is guided and introduced by the European Commission and the European mechanism. And this is where we see that certain lag meeting the climate actions it seems okay, but sometimes we are forgetting about the security of supply. That lag is forgotten, and we have several occasions where at least the Hungarian system, energy system, electricity supply system was close to the blackout. And these, the number of similar situations are year by year increasing. Those are fixed in the ACER's annual report. But, well, I mean, for us, I would say there are no other choice, nuclear and the combination of renewable energy resources. And having in mind that we have regions which are not members to the European Union, instability in the neighborhood is also has an impact on our system. So you need to take your responsibility from the government point of view and deliver energy when it's needed. In one hand, you need to take care of your neighborhood as well, but also, I mean, you have to avoid accident situations. So I mean, when the system would collapse, we don't know what the future carbon prices will look like. We have some expectations and calculations. Nevertheless, the instability is too large, and this is where government intervention seems to be the only solution. That's
Thank you. We have a long list of questions actually aimed mostly at you, but so I'll give you one more, an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the POX2 project and the progress you've made there. And also, perhaps you could respond to the question I've seen of a couple of people about what are you doing, what strategies are you taking to make sure that the costs are as low as possible? And how are you learning from the Leningrad 2 project, which I think your plant is based on? Can you elaborate upon that?
Yes, thank you very much. We feel that we are in a very good situation because, please let me show you. We have just submitted a day before yesterday the POX2 project company license application for the construction of the 2 new units to the nuclear regulator, the Hungarian Atomic Energy Agency. Then the agency may have about maximum 15 months for disclosing its final decision, and then the project is ready, and the company is ready to start to lead the first concrete. So it was a great achievement from the company. So we concluded, you know, the new build project, the intergovernmental agreement with the Russian Federation, with the Rosatom, and the financial intergovernmental agreement in 2014. And we also signed in the following year the 3 implementation agreements, the EPC contract, the fuel supply contract, and the O&M contract. We obtained since then more than 450 licenses and permits, where there are basic licenses such as the environmental license and the site license. And currently, this is the small brochure of the content, about the content of the implementation license application, and some description about the technology. Itself, the implementation license application documentation is a 283,000 page long documentation that is about, has a height of, in paper, about a 10-floor building. So this includes the nuclear safety related parts, description of the basic design, the preliminary safety analysis report, the probabilistic and deterministic assessments and calculations. And so the regulatory body will review it in the coming next 12 months, and they can extend it by another 3 months. So actually the correction and construction and direction base is being constructed. The construction works has already started last year. The area was handed over in February 2018 to the contractor. The physical works are ongoing. The transformer station with a capacity of 30 megawatt is being built. Canteen, administrative building are also there. The engineering, for the engineering staff and administrative building is in place. And I would say that the key factors for the success, our joint success with the Russian partner, is our 40 years experience, nuclear experience with the operation of the VVR technology. Essentially, it's a good reactor design, the new design as well. We have some experienced workforce, supportive background institutions with nuclear knowledge, and R&D. And I should also emphasize the need for the talent development through our R&D facilities. We have research reactor, training reactor, a brand new European laser research facility. We are also working with some colleagues on the gas-cooled 4th generation reactor development project called Allegro. And we also contracted an agreement with 6 universities that will have financial support for 100 students each year to prepare our human background. So we believe that continuous learning, that was already mentioned as by Mrs. Kogan, as far as I remember, is a key to have a successful nuclear industry in the country. And just one notice also that the Paksh nuclear power project, the new build project, is not a not a first of a kind project. So we have been visiting both the Novovoronezh site, the St. Petersburg site, so the Leningrad power plant. We have just been visiting the Ostrovets power plant in Belarus as well. And we know that the work conditions in Bangladesh and Turkey as well. So there is a communication between the different new builds, and we are very happy to make use that experience exchange between the different new sites, and we're also thankful for the contractor for this potential to practice on the site. Well, basically we have all the knowledge now, a complete knowledge of what we are going to construct that we hadn't experienced 40 years ago.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that elaboration, and congratulations on making such important progress towards the project.
Thank you.
Time is very short. Let me ask Kirsty a very quick question. You mentioned this, and I think Mike's presentation highlighted this as well. This harmonization of standards should be an important objective. And one questioner pointed out that we've been talking about doing that for 30 or 40 years, and we haven't made any progress. So is there any reason to think we're going to get it this time?
Well, we have a new imperative now that didn't exist before. You know, we have an emergency, and you know, nuclear technology can make a contribution not only in the power sector, as we've been hearing about the important contribution at gigawatt scale. Conventional nuclear plants can make a competitive contribution towards power in this power sector in the grid, but advanced reactor technologies can also contribute beyond the power sector for the production of hydrogen, for example, and clean synthetic fuels, as well as the provision of heat with a very small environmental footprint. And so I think as we start to look beyond as we start to broaden the value proposition for nuclear technology and look at new delivery and deployment models, moving away from the project-based approach to a much more standardized product-based approach, that creates really interesting new opportunities to innovate not only technology innovation, but organizational innovation and actually regulatory innovation too. And one key idea would be moving much more towards an open architecture based approach to technology innovation, which would enable standardization of codes and standards, enabling a very different kind of licensing approach, more akin to the kind of regulatory approaches that we're used to seeing in other industries like aviation, for example. Another highly regulated, complex, very large manufacturing environment producing very complicated, highly regulated machines, where we expect to see very high levels of safety and performance. So I think there are opportunities for us to innovate further, and we certainly have the incentives to do so.
Well, thank you for that very much. We are unfortunately out of time, but Mike, as the chair of this group, I'll give you any final 30-second comment you might have.
So I think the report comes at a really important time. Those who don't necessarily see such a strong role in nuclear use the argument the projects are always risky and expensive. I think the evidence in this report says that doesn't need to be so. There's a strong role for government. There's also a strong role for the sector to step up to the plate and, working with governments, deliver meaningful long-term cost reduction programs.
Thank you very much. And again, my thanks to all of you for your participation today. I wish we had another hour for a conversation. I think there's a lot more to explore with all this, but it's been a very interesting discussion. And again, thank you. And Mike, thank you for your leadership on this group and for the contributions of the group. And let me also again thank Antonio Vallo-Soleil, Michel Bartholomé, and also Samuel Bilbao Leon, who was the head of the division that produced this study. They all worked very hard on this and are very proud of it. And you will see that we will have more discussions along these lines. Over the next few weeks, we will have a series of webinars that will look at the role of nuclear energy in a post-COVID environment. As you can see on the slide here, over the next 4 weeks, we will have very brief webinars on these subjects. And we will also have a webinar next week to introduce a new standard nuclear data standard, the generalized nuclear database structure, which is a very important breakthrough in the scientific community. So there'll be more webinars to come from the NEA. I thank all of you for joining us today. Please stay healthy, take care of yourselves and your family, and join us again for another webinar very soon. Thank you very much.